Hello, everybody. Star Performance Consulting present episode 3 of his podcast. I'm very excited to have a very special guest and a close friend of mine who is a serial entrepreneur. He has made seamless transition between corporate world and entrepreneurship multiple times. He is one such individual who perhaps can be called as industry veteran in wealth tech and financial services, and have personally found his advice on the investment second to none. He has created and exited multiple companies by creating value to the shareholders. Currently, he has founded Goalteller, which is quite ahead of his time in concept in wealth tech space, and he's doing wonders in that space. So please join me in welcoming Vivek Banka, who has had a very illustrious career, and I'm really looking forward to learning from him. Vivek, a very warm welcome to you, and thank you so much for your time. It's truly an honor to have you on this podcast.
Thank you, Deepak.
So let's get started, Vivek. For the sake of our audience, tell us a bit about your corporate and entrepreneurship journey.
Yeah, thanks for that. It's been approximately 2 decades of work right now behind me. I traveled to Bangalore in 2003, post which I started my own wealth management firm called Bullseye Investments, which I ran for approximately 2 odd years. And 2005, then I moved out from there into a French bank called BNP Paribas to head the Karnataka practice for private banking. I worked there for 5 years until 2010, post which I moved to an Indian firm called IIFL Wealth, which was setting up shop. IIFL Wealth is the only listed, no, not the only listed, amongst the first listed wealth company in India. I set up their Bangalore practice and was there for around 6 odd years, part of the initial founding team. 2016, I moved out and started my own wealth tech venture called Altior Capital, which I ran for approximately 2.5 years. And that was acquired by IIFL Wealth in 2018 end. And yeah, post serving an acquisition transition period of approximately 1.5 to 2 years, I moved out and then started Goalteller. Goalteller has been around for a year and a half, and we are at the cusp of launch over the next month or month and a half. Yeah, so that's a broad helicopter view of what I've done.
Fantastic. So you have made very seamless transition between corporate world and entrepreneurship multiple times.
And vice versa.
And vice versa, exactly. Right. So what has been the most fascinating and challenging assignment in your career? Tell us few learnings which you got out of such a
I think the most challenging is Goalteller, because I think what we're trying to achieve with Goalteller is something which I think has not been achieved yet so far by anyone else. And which is also one of the reasons why the launch has taken so long since the time we actually started work on this. And the challenging part is essentially eradicating 80% of the human in an investment advisory journey or a financial planning journey. And whenever you try to eradicate or reduce the dependence on humans, the kind of technology and the kind of maybe machine learning that you got to imbibe in the system is extremely comprehensive. So I think this is the most challenging assignment, and the learning is, I think the learning continues, but the learning so far is that one should not get impatient when someone is trying to do something extremely optimistic.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you said comprehensive. I think it's not only comprehensive, it's complicated as well, given that you're trying to remove the human intervention. Right. I mean, personally speaking, I mean, when I am looking at investment, I would rather have an individual advising me on certain things. So it requires a lot of, let's say, mind shift change for an individual as well who's trying to invest with your company.
Yeah. Well, the complication is at the end of the technology, but that's where our biggest challenge is right now. That how to simplify the thing which is complicated at the back end. So for a user, it should be very simplistic, and that's what is the most challenging part.
Yeah, of course. I mean, if the user interface has to be easy, the
No, not the interface plus everything.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, even the experience, the entire experience. So the backend has to be complicated to get there. Now, private equity and wealth management has evolved significantly over the last 2 decades. What are the most significant changes you have come across, given that you have been in this industry for the last 2 decades?
I think very, very drastic changes are happening in both of these areas, and I think for its own good. However, I feel there will be a lot of accidents in the journey, especially on the private equity side. Over the last 4 5 years, there has been a big euphoria around this entire space. So, a lot of investors without the know how of private equity or angel investments are getting into this space without fully understanding the risks, the returns, and everything on that. We've not had a very long period of recession over the last, I think, almost a decade right now. Any recession that has come, whether it's the COVID or a couple of months back, has not lasted for more than 1 or 2 quarters at max. And investors are yet to see a long drawn recession. I think when that happens, you will see a lot of learnings that will happen and the industry should evolve more. But the good thing is that people are opening up to that asset class. And in India, people, private equity or startup are not a taboo anymore. So, more and more people are wanting to join in startups, even taking salary cuts. ESOPs of startups are getting more valued right now by even employees. Families of employees are very open to their kids joining a startup, unlike a decade earlier, forget decade of 5 years back. So I think over the next 5 years, I think both private and equity and wealth management will change in two ways. One is it will get a little more organized. I think you will have more people into that bandwagon of investments. And lastly, I think tech, especially on the wealth management side, will play a big part, which we are seeing, but we are just seeing the tip of the iceberg right now. And a lot of regulatory changes that are happening, which we are not aware of. But since we are close to the industry, we know that a lot of regulatory changes are happening, which will accelerate this whole tech process. Something like I think just yesterday there was this news article about account aggregator where SBI is now gone live. They're talking about that as being the next UPI. I think those are the things which will accelerate tech adoption of wealth management and even financial investments in general.
Sure. Interesting, you made this point about a lot of people now joining startups and open to it. In fact, I was having a conversation with somebody and he made a very interesting point that, let's say, 5 to 7 years back, even perhaps lesser than that, joining a startup meant taking a risk. Now people don't consider that as a risk. They consider this as an opportunity as compared to the risk. So there's a very big mindset change which has happened in terms of how they perceive and how they look at a startup. So
because in my third startup, so I have seen in 2003 the perception in people's mind. Then I've seen it in 2016. In fact, 2016 when I started Altior, also people were very apprehensive. But at Goalteller, I think we have found people to be very, very open to joining startup.
Got it. Now, I wanted to ask you about the latest trends, but I think you already spoke about it, which is basically the tech part and
the tech and regulatory changes. I think these are the two big, massive changes that are happening, and of course, the information dissemination also, because of which people are more open to adopting, new technologies, etc.
Sure. I think you briefly mentioned markets have definitely taken a beating in last 6 months or so, right? I mean, last couple of quarters has been really bad for the market. Have you seen this kind of a market sentiments impacting investors' outlook? What's the mood with investors right now? What would be your advice to them?
I think just a month and a half back, we at Goalteller had released a note that on 6 reasons why we are bullish on the markets. And since then, the markets have gone up by 8 to 10%. And we continue to be positive on the markets. And we don't feel crash, which is, short and shallow, will impact any investor sentiment. So in my experience, investor sentiment gets only impacted if the fall is long drawn and not deep. So even in COVID, you see markets had fallen 40-45%. But there was not a big impact on investor sentiment because the markets came back with a bang. There are periods in the past like 2008 to 14 where equities were flat for 5-6 years at a stretch. And that is where the market sentiments get impacted. More than 6-12 months where if equities give negative returns, that's when retail investors start moving away. Of course, there are a lot of structural things that have happened in the industry, like the SIP book, which is swelled up to 13,000 crores every month into equity assets. I think those have become, I think, fairly irreversible, if I might say. I think not completely irreversible, but if markets fall, I guess from 13,000, it might become 8-9,000. But I think a large chunk will still continue to go in. And in fact, a big demonstration was the last 6 months when FIs have been pulling money left, right, and center from the Indian markets. But the markets were resilient just because of the domestic investors, where they lapped up almost all the selling of the
Oh, really?
of the foreign investors.
Yeah, in fact, that's right. When I look at the Indian market, it hasn't dropped as much as, let's say, US or Europe market has dropped, right? I mean, comparatively.
Yes, yes, yes. A lot of reasons for that. I think one is the retail investor. Second is the Indian investor. I think, especially the retail investor in this cycle, has become a little more smart in terms of investing in quality companies. Penny stocks, etc., has not been as badly swarmed by retail investors as in earlier cycles. So people are more sticking to quality, etc. So I think those are good signs for
Sure.
Indian equity markets. We did not have, I think, though we had a lot of folios on the crypto side, but we did not have large amounts being invested by people.
Sure.
So those are the things that has helped significantly.
Now, one of the things which I keep on hearing, and maybe this may be an opinion of people, that during COVID, when the market dropped, people had a lot of money, and that's why the market started again ramping up. Whereas now, when the market is going down, people are saying that there's not enough fund for the market to kind of again go back to the same level as it was, let's say a year back or so. What's your opinion on that kind of a statement?
No, I don't think there is not enough money. I think that's yes. Post COVID, what happened is because of the work from home culture and the fact that spending was limited because people were confined to their homes. There was more money, and more than money, there was more time for investors to trade. And I think it is not the money; it is the time which actually accelerated this entire
Interesting.
retail participation, which is reducing a bit. But I think the demographic dividend that India has right now, plus the fact that there are a lot of technology advancements in investing that has happened. 4 years back, you could not open an equity account or a bank account online. Today, you can do all of that. You can open a fixed deposit account online.
True.
So those things are irreversible changes. So I don't think the flow of money can get ebbed a bit, but I don't think it will reverse until and unless there is a 12, 15 month recessionary phase. And that also, I think, could be just temporary blip. Secondly, I think FIs have started coming back into the markets last 2 odd weeks, and I think Indian equities look poised for a reasonable period of a good period for the next 6, 12 months. It is my personal opinion.
All right, so that means you gave me some ideas of investing in the Indian market now. Thank you for that. Now I'm going to change the topic a bit and talk about more of mindset thing. So you have basically made, as I mentioned earlier as well, from corporate world to entrepreneurship multiple times. Tell us about the mindset change you had to bring in yourself to make that kind of a switch.
I personally don't think actually a person who does their corporate life very well, typically nowadays most corporate jobs also require a lot of entrepreneurship
Yeah,
inside them.
yeah,
Until and unless you got a role which is extremely mundane,
yeah,
etc. But most corporate roles, they require you to behave like a business owner.
yeah.
And I was always on the sales side, so it was not so much of a change in terms of the mindset. Of course, multitasking and handling diverse set of responsibilities is the biggest and the most challenging thing that as a business owner you got to
Yeah.
take care of, because at 1 minute you're handling operations, at the second minute you could be an office boy,
Yeah.
the third minute you could be a sales guy, a marketing guy. You were all put into one.
Yeah.
And more than that, I think one important thing is to handle people. I think people management in a startup is very critical, because at startups it is very difficult for you to match salaries of what
Of course.
a larger corporate gives you.
Yeah.
And which is why employee satisfaction and the fact that the employee matches or the team member matches your vision of the company, and he's also participating in any upside of the company is very critical. So at Goalteller, we've got every single person who's working here as an equity shareholder of Goalteller.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah. So that is something which I think, as I said, I have not had a mindset change, but two big things is one is, of course, as I said, the diversity of different things that you got to do. Second is, I think people who are not anxious should not do their own business, because I've seen a little bit of anxiety is very helpful while doing your own business.
Absolutely.
So I think broadly that's it.
Yeah. In fact, if you think about it, many of the startups, when they go for hiring and when they're looking at corporate people, one of the things they said, oh, this person doesn't have startup experience, so let's not hire that person. In my mind, I mean, the point which you also made, it's not a question about knowing the startup or as a business owner. It's a question of if you have the ownership mindset, even in the corporate job which you had, you would be able to basically use that experience even in the startup world. It's a question of how you gel with the people and how you basically,
Yeah, absolutely.
right, and have that ownership mindset to grow the business, that you
Yeah.
are going to grow along with the business. Moving on. So now you mentioned Goalteller a couple of times. Why don't you share some information or big plans what you have for the company? Of course, don't share anything confidential.
No, there's nothing confidential. I personally believe that these things, there is nothing to hide. A lot of entrepreneurs try to hide their business ideas. I don't think it can be done because there are a lot of smart people globally, and 99.99%, if you have thought of an idea, most likely someone else has thought about it. It's just that the execution is where the difference lies. It's not in the idea as such.
I think initiative and execution, right?
Yeah, and more than execution, I think it is the courage.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely agree.
Yeah. So in terms of at Goalteller, our plans are to democratize financial advice, which large investors, large family offices get, which are people who have more than $100 million of assets and more, bringing that advice to an investor or a retail investor, and that can only be done through technology, and which is what is our goal with Goalteller, and hopefully we are in that process, and God willing, we'll be able to do that.
Absolutely, I'm pretty sure about it that you'll be able to get there. What are some of the biggest challenges you faced as a founder, and how did you overcome it?
One unsolicited advice which I like to give people is, if someone is starting on their own, please keep at least 12 to 18 months of lifestyle expenses with you in a liquid fund or something which is easily accessible.
Yeah.
Because a lot of startup failures I've seen because of the fact that they've got very short runways, and you cannot predict market cycles.
Yeah.
And which is why having a reasonable runway is very important to reduce emotional challenges, emotional mindset difficulties that you might have. That where will my next bread and butter come from?
Yeah.
That's one part of it. The second part of it is, of course, getting people. Despite all the advancements and the positivity around startups, getting people continues to be a big challenge, especially because now there are large startups also which offer both equity and a lot of money, unlike a few years back.
Yeah.
So competing with these guys to get good quality people, retain them, is extremely difficult.
Yeah.
And stitching together a team, I think these three things in my mind is one of the biggest challenge for a startup. Followed by other stuff like you have other stuff, but those take care of itself if you've got a decent and good team.
Yeah. So, what would be your advice to new talents looking to get into private equity or wealth management space?
On the wealth management side, I mean, people should take it as a 5-10 year view rather than take it as a 1-2 year money making exercise. It's a business where you can, create amazing networks, amazing relationships which last beyond your lifetime also. If you impart the proper advice, proper service, etc. I've had clients who have been with me for the last 2 decades right now, and it's more like family right now, and there is immense amount of mutual trust which is there. So wealth management is a great, avenue for people to come and get into as an industry, but people need to be patient. It is not something which can be built in a day. Sure. On the other side, on the private equity side, I think again there are a host of opportunities, and I think the opportunities will continue to increase because over the next few years, because of this entire digitization regulation, you will have a lot of more private equity funds mushroom up, and which will continue to keep the industry very buoyant in terms of employment.
That's a great advice for the new talents. In fact, one thing which I have noticed among the new talents, and irrespective of the sectors, 5 years back or 7 years back, most of the people who were coming out of the college, they were trying to find a job outside India. But now, what I see is most of the people are happy being in India. There's a lot of optimism to be in this market, and they believe that there is more growth potential to be in India as compared to going outside India, and which I feel is great for Indian scenario, because one of the things which India has suffered for a long period of time is brain drain. In fact, a lot of new areas have also opened up for the people. You gave an example of fintech, right? From wealth management to fintech. I mean, in every industry, if you see, there are a lot of new type of company which has opened up. There are a lot of new opportunities, new kind of roles are opened up. For example, this data analyst role, which I don't think even existed 5 years back. Now it's like a big thing in today's market. Vivek, that's all questions which I had for you. I think it has been great learning in terms of whatever you have shared, like the founders having that long-term perspective, having the runway for meeting their lifestyle expenses before they can think about starting a startup, and having the courage and execution. I think these are very critical points, and at some point in time, people do miss out on that. I would like to emphasize on the word courage. It takes a lot of courage to leave a well-established corporate job and to get into our startup. Now, you might have money to manage your own lifestyle, but given the uncertainty what you have, that how long your startup is going to take to come up, that requires a lot of courage to manage that uncertainty, right? Keep your calm, keep your composure, and then manage that team. And even the managing this team in the startup is not so easy, as you mentioned, right? Because you're not paying as much as any other company can pay. Though I firmly believe now that pay disparity has really come down, even between like proper corporate job and the startups, is gradually coming down. Now, of course, the smaller startups which are just starting on, they can't pay so much. I could get that point, but over a period of time, like if you stick with that kind of a startup for 3 to 5 years and that startup happens to do well, you will more than make up that money because of ESOPs and other things, right? So the way I look at it is, a person who is trying to get into startup world, they should have that time horizon of 5 years, invest that 5 years of time, and in that 5 years of time frame, I think money part will be taken care of. Somehow it is going to get balanced as compared to seeing that, okay, in the first year you're making less money and
No, even if the startup doesn't succeed, what I've seen is employees get a big jump when they move
exactly,
to a larger corporate
exactly,
because
yeah,
larger corporates have started valuing
that experience,
startup employees much, much more.
yeah.
In fact, I was reading this report a couple of weeks back where I think Shadi.com mentioned that now brides who are searching for grooms, they are mentioning startup as a positive about marrying. Yes. Earlier, it was not the case. People did not
I
want to
absolutely
marry
agree.
people who work in
Yeah,
a startup because of uncertainty. I think that's
exactly,
a big paradigm change in
yeah.
mentalities. That has happened.
Moving on, Vivek, now what we are going to do is we are going to have a bit of fun. I'm going to throw some questions to you, maybe one word question or 3 word question. You just have to mention one word against that, whatever comes to your mind. Don't think too much. It's just a free flow thing. There's no right or wrong. Make it as funny as possible. So let's start. India,
Very positive.
startups in India.
Should work on innovation more.
Okay, so innovation. Pain point of founders.
People.
ESG in India.
Encouraging.
China.
Vulture.
All right, Vivek. I think that's all what I had for the rapid fire round. I mean, it has been a great conversation, a lot of learnings for me personally, and I'm sure the audience will get a lot out of this. So, thank you so much for your
Thank
time.
you so
Really,
much. Yeah, thank you very much. It was a nice freewheeling discussion.
absolutely, and I really enjoyed the discussion. So, thank you for your time, and hopefully, audience will love it.
Yes, thank you so much.
Have a good day.
Thank you.